Hello everyone, welcome back to the PowerPlayChess channel, covering the 11th round of the US Championships with 4 decisive games in this round. So plenty of stuff to choose from. Unfortunately, the tournament leader Fabiano Caruana had an uneventful draw with Jeffrey Xiong. Also, the player trailing him by half a point, Ruy Lopez, couldn't really impress with the white pieces, had a very solid draw against Evander Liang. So I decided to have a look at a game between Dariusz Swiercz and Samuel Sevian, which featured a highly topical line of the open Ruy Lopez. So let's have a look. The first 20-25 moves or so were still pretty much all well-known theory. So let's go through that. We have the main line of the Spanish. And now knight takes e4, the open variation. d4, b5, bishop b3, d5, de5, bishop e6, knight bd2, bishop e7, c3. And now knight c5, dropping out of the center with a knight, bishop c2. And now black's idea is to follow up here with the move d4. Knight to b3 and d3. This is a very important line in which white can still bail out here with the move knight takes c5. After d takes c2, queen takes d8, rook takes, everything gets swapped. We get to see a queenless middle game in which the pawn on c2 will soon be wrapped up by the rook. But it should be said that black is going to put the rook on d5, win the pawn on e5 himself, and it's a very equal type of endgame we will get to see. So the principled move nowadays here is the move bishop to b1. And now after knight takes b3, a takes b3, we get a very sharp fight in which the big question is whether the pawn on d3 is a weakness or an asset. Right now the pawn is well supported by black's pieces, but we will get to see that there are some counter ideas for white as well. Like white played here the move rook e1, castling kingside, and now h3. Looks like a little slow move, but we have a clear idea. After queen d7, b4, rook fd8, we see that black is reinforcing the control over the pawn on d3. And white will try to play around it, keep developing the pieces. Bishop to f4, active spot for the bishop. And black goes a5. So the point is that if you would trade off these pawns, then black is intending to connect the backward c pawn so that it will be a protected pass pawn, and that would be very bad news for white. So white has to act very fast here. Plays the move g4, kicking the bishop away, and the bishop drops back to g6, maintaining control over the pawn on d3. b takes a5. Rook takes a5. And now rooks could be swapped on a5, but the principled move here is bishop a2. And now we understand why the move g4 had been inserted earlier, because we are activating the bishop and are planning to play e6 very soon with some potential threats against the black king. As I said, this is a highly topical line, was even seen in a recent game played at the European Club Cup, a tournament I played in myself as well. Game between Vishy Anand and Shahryar Mamedyarov. Shahryar being the big expert on the black side of this line. He likes the dynamics, the chances for both sides, and he came up with a stunning novelty. Rook takes a2, but it's an exchange sacrifice, but not too great. He tried to catch his opponent by surprise, but after trying to steer things up, the cold-blooded move knight d2 was very nice, and we have these ideas to put the queen on f3 or even the queen on b3. It turned out that black didn't have sufficient compensation for the exchange, and white went on to win a very nice game. So for this occasion, Sevian decided to return to the main line here with the move rook f8. How bizarre it looks that move, but it's all well-known theory. And soon the idea will be revealed. White plays b4, trying to force the rook to go to an inconvenient square. If it would go to a3 or a6, unprotected squares, there would be bishop takes f7. So rook a4 is the main move. And now white has to play e6. Very principled move, of course, trying to open up the position with the idea that after fe6, bishop takes e6, white is winning the queen, obviously. So it's important to note that white should play this move. If you go queen d2, which was once played by Fabiano Caruana against Giri in the Norway Chess Tournament 2015, there is the move knight e8, and the knight is on its way to e6. Probably a move like c5 can be played, and well, it turns out that the d pawn for black is way stronger than that pawn on e5. So back to the game, e6 is the principled move, and black is not going to take, but played here the move queen d8. Right decision, e takes f7, and now, okay, it's possible to take with the bishop on f7, but also the move king h8 is actually quite interesting. The king would like to go to the corner anyway, and it doesn't enable white to capture on f7 with check, followed by rook takes a4. So up to here, pretty well-known stuff. And obviously, looking at the time management of Swiercz in this game, he couldn't recall his exact analysis, as the principled move here is bishop d2, getting out of the f-file, and later on we will see that the bishop would have been much better placed on this square, as on f4 it's a potential target of the rook on the f-file. So Swiercz played bishop e6, rook takes a1, queen takes a1, and now we have left theory. Like, probably the players were familiar with the ideas, but I think black is absolutely fine in this case. He takes the pawn on f7 anyway, and after bishop takes f7, rook takes f7, well, you can see there are some issues on the f-file with the unprotected pieces, with the bishop on f4, requiring defense, support from the rook on e1. So rook e4 would be the main move, queen d5, and now, for instance, a move like queen e1 or even knight d2 looks as if white is still able to fight here, but I believe black is very comfortable. However, instead of trading off the bishops, white decided to play the move queen a2. Also very understandable, anticipating the possible trade of the light squared bishops. But in that case, well, the white queen would be very active, obviously. If you would take on f4, you can take on c6, the queen defending the knight on f3. But most importantly, the pawn on d3 is going to lack support and can soon be wrapped up with moves like rook d1. And black also need to think of potential back rank problems in this case. So black is not going to cooperate. It's not going to take on e6, and instead a much better move was played, bishop to g6. I like that move. The bishop is back on this diagonal, supporting the pawn on d3, and of course we have a huge threat against the move against the bishop on f4. So that means that also rook e4 is no longer possible, as the bishop covers that square. But queen d2 is the move, protecting the bishop. And now, big question is, how is black going to untangle? Because white's pieces, they look quite impressive. The bishops are controlling quite a number of squares in the center. And, well, if you would play bishop d6, I guess the problem here is that bishop g5 could follow. And that's kind of an unpleasant move. If you move the queen to e8 to protect the knight on c6, there is bishop d5. And white is consolidating the position, and after attacking both the queen and the knight, black has to go queen d7. But then after bishop e6, at least white has a draw, and I don't think that is what black had on his mind. So instead of bishop d6, he played here clever move, h6. Very useful move, as it prepares the move bishop d6 while the g5 square remains under control. Should be pointed out that bishop takes h6, spectacular sacrifice with the idea to get the queen involved, is simply not possible because of rook takes f3. So white is looking at ways trying to exploit the weakened king side. Played here the move king g2, protecting the knight on f3 and enabling the bishop to move. Bishop d6. And now white is for a big choice. What should he do with the bishop? If you would go bishop e3, there's bishop e4, and things terribly go wrong now with this pin on the knight. And if you would play bishop takes h6, spectacular idea, and I'm pretty sure that Swiercz had been calculating all of this. He didn't go for this move. Obviously, he was hoping probably for g takes, and then after queen takes h6, bishop h7 only move, knight g5, threatening mate with the queen on h7, queen e7, and now bishop f5 is the main move, attacking the queen. Of course, you cannot take on e1 because of checkmate. And if you go queen to g7, we have the trade of queens, picking up the bishop on h7, and white is at least 2 pawns up with a winning endgame. But look at this point, guys. I think the reason why Swiercz didn't go for this line is Sevian had a fantastic counter blow here. He doesn't take the bishop, but after bishop takes h6, instead eliminates the main defender of the king. Rook takes f3. Big move. With the idea that if you would take on f3, there's this fantastic move, queen a8, and the queen reaches the long diagonal with massive threat of a discovered check by the knight. Like if you just are playing carelessly, bishop g5, we put a knight on d4, double check. Bishop on g3 covers a lot of squares as well. If you go king e3, there is queen to e4 with checkmate. Any other move, let's say you play here king to e3, then we have knight e5 with the threat of queen to e4. If you go queen d1 to create some space for the king, the queen comes anyway, knight f3 comes with check, the king has to go to c1, there is d2 check, hitting the rook as well, but after bishop takes d2, we have opened up the diagonal for the bishop, and queen is going to be checkmate. What a fantastic line, and you see how powerful black's pieces are in the center. So that means that we cannot take on h6. Making a long story short, white decided to take on d6, queen takes d6, and of course the exchange of dark squared bishops gives black some new squares to work with. Critical moment in the game, because I think around this point white started to drift. If you would play queen e3 to support the bishop, there's rook e8, and that would be a very unpleasant pin. I think the key move here for white would be to play bishop b3, intending rook e6 with a double attack. Now that sacrifice with rook takes f3 no longer works. After king takes f3, knight e5, at least white can take on e5, but much stronger here is the surprising move king to g3, stepping into a potential discovered check. But after knight to c4, we have the move queen f4, so we avoid the loss of the queen. After d2, we have rook d1, everything is under control, and this looks to be winning. Like if you would have dropped back with the bishop to a2 instead of b3, then bishop c2 ideas would have been pretty annoying. But that's why bishop b3 is a good move. Black has to deal with the threat. Should go queen f6, for instance. And now, if you go rook e3 to protect the knight, we have bishop e4, which is highly unpleasant. You cannot take the bishop as the knight would be hanging. That's why after queen f6, bishop d5 back is the move which initiates a repetition of moves. Swiercz went here for the move knight h4 instead, hitting the bishop. And now after bishop to h7, he played here the move knight f5, which turns out to be a mistake. Critical moment. After bishop takes f5, probably g takes f5 has to be played. But I think this is not a nice position to play. Knight e5 will come. Rook d8 is one of the ideas. Let's say if you go rook e4, we go rook d8. And I think the d-pawn is very unpleasant force to reckon with. Note that f4 is never really a possibility because of queen c6. So you should keep the pawn on f2 or put it on f3 to at least secure the the rook on e4. But this kind of position, even if you would play knight c4, forcing the trade of minor pieces, then the d-pawn is still really unpleasant. Queen f6 is a good move, dealing with the threat of rook d4. And I think only black can be better in this endgame. Thanks to the passed pawn, thanks to the exposed king, there are some clear chances here for black. So instead, bishop takes f5 was played. And now, interesting moment, because black didn't profit from this mistake. He could have gone here for the move knight e7, which is a big move. There's no time to take the pawn on d3. After queen takes d3, we have knight takes f5, eliminating the defender of the queen. If you take on f5, there's queen takes d3. If you take on d6, we have knight takes d6, and it's game over. If you would take with the bishop instead, then we have knight g6, and now knight f4 is a huge threat. You cannot take the knight because the bishop is pinned. If you go rook e3, we give a knight check anyway. After the king goes away, we have rook d8, and next move, we are going to take the bishop with our knight, and black wins a piece. Also, after other moves, let's say if you would play bishop e4, we have the key move knight to d5, and that's a big move. Again, no time to take on d3 because of the knight fork on f4. While if you take on d5, then, well, white's king is too vulnerable, and the rook can simply enter with rook f3. The pawn is well supported, the queen is a very bad blockading piece, and with ideas like h5, we are trying to further open up the king side and try to hit the pawn on h3 with the queen. Was not played in the game, big moment. Instead, knight e5 was played. Also a very tempting move, hoping to enter with a knight on f3 at some point. But white played here the best move, f4, kicking the knight. And, well, obviously, if you move the knight, there's queen takes d3. And, well, white is holding on here. It's not so clear at all. And if you would go knight g6, then even king g3 is quite okay for white, as the pawn on g3 is well, I mean, the pawn on f4 is well covered by the king on g3. But look what happens. Rook takes f5, guys. This is a big move, and I assume that in time trouble now, Swiercz just gave away a probably holdable position. It should be clear that if you take the rook with g takes f5, there is queen d5, and there's no good square for the king to go to. If king h2, there's knight f3, and the same, of course, for king to g1, there is knight f3 with a knight fork picking up the queen. So these options can just be eliminated. Also, in case of king f1, we have queen h1 check, king f2, queen h2. You got to keep the queen defended, and then there's knight c4 picking up the queen. Then there's also king g3 still, but then we have queen f3 check. If you go king h4, now there's knight c4. We are in exchange down, but trying to deflect the queen from keeping the pawn on f4 defended. Like, if you would go queen h2, there is d2, and the d-pawn is unstoppable. You can give one check, but that's it. The queen is out of play, and d1 queen will come next. If you move the queen, let's say queen d1, we have queen takes f4 check. You cannot go to h5 because of checkmate. And if you go queen g4, we have this nice check on f2, hitting the rook, queen g3. And now, look, we can simply trade off queens, and we have this promotion trick with the move d2. In case of rook d1, there is knight e3, rook takes d2, and knight f1 with a beautiful knight fork. We eventually pick up the rook. If you try to be clever with rook e8, trying to control the pawn from behind, then we can simply interfere with a knight on d6, and the pawn is unstoppable anyway. Then we still have the move king to f2, and after queen f3, there is king to g1, queen g3. Obviously, you cannot play queen g2 because the rook is hanging, but also knight f3 would lead to a checkmate very soon. So that's not possible. If you go king h1, we have queen takes h3. If king g1, there's knight f3, obviously. And if you go queen h2, we can trade off the queens and put a knight on f3 once again. So king f1 only move. And now here again, we have knight c4, big move. after which it's game over. Because if the queens are getting swapped on g2, then we have the same trick with knight e3 coming next. That's game over. And if you play rook e8 check, for instance, we have king h7, queen e1, queen takes h3, king f2, we pick up a number of pawns, and well, the king is in trouble. If king f1, knight e2 wins the game. Nice move, as the knight is protected by the queen. If king f3, just one moment of alertness, please, because if you would play the move d2, thinking that you would queen the d-pawn, there is rook h8, and that would allow a very nasty repetition of moves with a perpetual. So you gotta play queen h5 first. Let's say if you go king to g3, then here again, don't play the move d2, because there is the move queen e6, and there's no good check. White is threatening, checkmate himself. If you take on e8 trying to eliminate the attacker, there is this sequence where you end up with an extra knight, but the repetition is simply inevitable. That's why after king g3, knight e6 would be the big move. Everything is well protected, knight can take on f5, and the attack is still going on. The d-pawn is pretty strong, so this should be decisive. Let's get back to the position. After rook takes f5, white didn't take with the g-pawn on f5. He should have taken with the rook on e5. And now you can trade off the rooks, but such a queen endgame is very drawish. Everything is well protected. Instead of trading off the rooks, probably black should continue with rook f8, keeping major pieces on the board. His king is safer than white's. There's a passed d-pawn. There are still practical chances, but probably this is holdable. Instead, white decided to take with the f-pawn on e5, but that is not so great, because after queen d5, whatever white does, let's say you go king g3, we have rook f3, and we have a mating attack. If king h4, there's g5, king h5, and this will lead to checkmate. And if you would play king h2, we have a lot of possibilities here, but it turns out that white is actually in a sort of zugzwang. There are no good moves. Even a move like king h7 is very nice. The queen cannot leave its blockading job. And if you push the e-pawn, then we have queen d6. That's a very important resource, obviously, as now the queen manages to enter. So here we see the rook will come to f3. That's actually what happened in the game as well. There followed king g1, and now rather than taking on e5, which is not so great, there is rook to f3, and it's all of a sudden it's game over. Because if you push the pawn, we have rook g3. Now, if you go king f2, it would lead to checkmate. And if you go king h2, there is queen f3. And now if you push the pawn, rook takes h3, king g1, rook h1 with checkmate. So white decided here to play the move queen g2 to protect the h3 pawn and cover the check on g3. But then the d-pawn will deflect the defenders. Rook d1 is forced, and now queen d3. Very nice move. If you would take on d2 with the queen, rook g3 is winning, but also rook f1 deflecting the rook from protecting the queen, and it's game over. So that's just one idea. Rook takes d2 was played, and now the queen is on the threat. We first give a check. If you go king to h1, we have rook takes h3 with checkmate. If you do king h2, we go queen f4, and in case of king h1, we have rook f1, and white is forced to give up the queen. If you do go king g1, we have rook to g3, and after rook e2, queen f3, we even don't take the queen yet, we play queen f3, it's even better, both are winning, so it was time to resign. Fantastic sharp win by Sevian in the 11th round of the US Championships, and that means they are, I mean not they, Samuel Sevian is approaching together with Dominguez, the leader, tournament leader Fabiano Caruana, only by 1 point with 2 rounds to go. Probably anything can still happen.